Good morning. My name is Matt Winberg, and thanks for joining us on behalf of the Hartsville Museum. I'm joined today with Andrea Steen, who's the museum manager here and the assistant manager. And we're here with our next lecture in our 40th anniversary lecture series, Blood Will Tell, City Built by Agriculture. And our special guest today is Presley Coker, and I'll let Andrea introduce Mr. Coker in just a minute. This is something that we started last month, so this is, like I mentioned, the second in our series, just to help tell more stories about Hartsville for those who may not know about Hartsville. So we hope you'll have plenty of questions to ask. You'll have your chance later to ask questions, so go ahead and start sending those in. Anything you want to know about Crema Coffee seeds, farms, and we'll make sure that Presley hears those, and he's a wealth of knowledge, so he'll be able to answer those pretty easily for you. We'll have more information about how you can be involved with our lecture series at the end. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Andrea Steen. She's going to introduce Presley, and you're going to be in for a treat. So I hope you enjoy.
Thank you for joining us today. We are in Crema, which is in downtown Hartsville, and thank you, Tiffany. Shout out to you for allowing us to give our guest lecture platform. He is Presley Coker. He is the chairman of Coker Farms National Historic Landmark here in Hartsville. And I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last year and learning more about Coker Pedigreed Company. And today he's going to give us a glimpse into what the company did for Hartsville. So Presley, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I will admit I am nervous. I don't know whether to fight, flight, or faint, but I will do my best. And I also would like to thank Tiffany, Chris, and Crema Coffee Bar. We have hosted around this room. It has been since March, a little bit before the COVID pandemic, and all the mess that came with it. But there are 276 pictures of the people and the catalogs and the varieties and the equipment of Coker Pedigreed Seed Company from 1915 to 1980. And we put it in Crema for a reason. The Coker Farms National Historic Landmark and our little museum is an interpretive center, and it's our desire to teach the younger generation the values, standards, and to some extent the methodologies used by people in the past. Because I'm a firm believer that while we should not live in the past, we can certainly learn from the past, and it helps us put our next best foot forward. And it's not about sitting in front of a computer screen or burying your face in a phone. I mean, it's getting out there and doing something, which is what these pictures depict. It was our intent to come in every week and Crema gets a lot of kids from college and the governor's school and high school that come in here. And it was just a perfect teaching environment. And I really want to come in here one afternoon a week and talk about the stories that many of these pictures tell, and give them a chance to ask questions about things that may be misunderstood or miscommunicated by colleges or media or whatever the case may be. But this is reality, and this reflects the real story of pretty much the 20th century. So with that, I would like to recognize some people that I don't know this Facebook Live stuff. I can't see people, so it's kind of weird. But as I understand it, my friend, one of my best friends, Dr. Stephen Harrison, he is the small grain breeder at LSU and is one of the foremost small grain breeders in the world. His father was Howard Harrison, who started working at Coker Pedigreed Seed Company, I believe, either in 1959 or 1961 as a small grain breeder. Howard Harrison was the world-renowned small grain breeder. I mean, he was the best small grain breeder in the world. We also have, I believe, and Dr. Stephen Kresovich. Dr. Stephen Kresovich He doesn't act like a doctor. He doesn't act like he's got all these degrees. He is the Robert and Lois Coker Chair of Molecular Genetics. And I talked a little bit about molecular genetics in my presentation, so if I get something wrong, don't give me an F. But he is supposed to have some students at Clemson University. Dennis Easton, I believe, is in Costa Rica or Belize or somewhere in Central America. His great-grandfather was Mr. Ellis, who started working at the seed company, and there is a Coker Ellis corn variety. We've got Jim Tyler with us in the back. Jim Tyler spent his career with Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, and if he was up here, we would all be laughing and unable to talk. He is the best storyteller that I have ever seen. If you get a chance to go and talk to Jim, spend some time and let him tell you some stories, and you will walk out of here wanting more. There are many people in this room that worked as young men and women at Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company in the summer. It had the opportunity when young men were 10, 12, 14 years old to go out and work in summer programs, harvesting by hand wheat and detaching corn and cropping tobacco and running thrashing machines. And it was hard work. But you know, I remember when I was 12, I got a raise to $1.11 an hour. I worked 45 hours a week. I brought home $42.10. And I don't care what anybody says. $42.10 to a 12 or 14-year-old in today's time is good money. But it was hard work, and I think it taught values that, and standards of work, and work ethic and principles that are very difficult to find in today's climate. You know, I think if we did today what the kids in yesterday in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s did, every attorney in town would be lined up trying to sue somebody. But that's just my opinion. I also wanted to recognize James Daniel Chaplin. James Daniel Chaplin, there's a picture of him, dirt and all, farms the Coker Farms National Historic Landmark land in Cotter, out on 4th Street, 1257 South 4th Street. He has done a magnificent job. That's a picture of him when he was 21 years old. He farmed that 22 acres of cotton. And he rented the equipment from his dad, who's a large farmer, Tommy Chaplin, Tommy and I the same age. And after he sold the cotton, he used the money to pay for his college education. And, you know, he went through college. He has no debt from college. He's expanded his farm. He wanted to be independent. But he's done a good job. And he got out there barefooted, short pants, muddy, dirty, pulling weeds, taking care of the land. In my opinion, and the reason he still farms that land is his motivation and his pleasure of working the land and profiting by his pleasure is representative of the standards that Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company had. And so I just want to give him a kudos for doing a good job for us. With that said, somewhere along the lines, I would love for people to ask questions about the pictures or anything about Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. So I may not be able to answer. I may be able to get an answer to the question, or maybe I'll make up an answer. But anyway, anything else, Andrew, before I start?
No, I'm enjoying this, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
I apologize, but I'm gonna have to read. I can get confused because there's so much information when you try to span almost a century and the people and everything else. So, what is or was Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company? Would anybody like to speculate or offer an answer? Lucy, you want to offer an answer? What was Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company?
It was a world-renowned seed breeder known all over the world, actually.
A company that bred, grew, and sold improved varieties to farmers? Yes. It was that and much more. I will try in my own humble manner to define how the seed company got started, the driving factors, keys to success, obstacles, and the missions of Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company. I offer that Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company was a lot more than just a seed breeding and seed sales company. In order to validate my position or hypothesis, we must look back in time in the South just after the end of the Civil War, which was 1865. Captain James Lloyd Coker, 1837 to 1918, promoted to major after the war, was wounded in the Battle of Chickamauga, Tennessee. That battle lasted September 18th to 20th of 1863. He was returned to Society Hill in the summer of 1864, 9 months later, thanks to the heroic efforts of his mother, Hannah Lloyd Coker. She was born in 1812 and died in 1900. She wrote a book, The Story of the Late War, in 1899. And I have a few copies of that book. If anybody has not read it, if you would like a copy, if I run out, I have more. But for every young lady coming out of high school looking for a path, if you want to read something about somebody that was inspired and overcome hurdles and battles and obstacles at a time when there were plenty of them, please either email Andrea. We will send you a book for free. I've got hundreds of them. And if anybody would like a copy afterwards, just let us know. But if it were not for her, Major James Lloyd Coker would have died from gangrene. There is no question about it. And Hartsville would probably look like a crossroads out in the country, to be perfectly honest. At least that's my opinion. In 1860, Major James Lloyd Coker married Susan Armstrong Stack. Together, they have a total of 11 children, with David R. Coker born as their 5th child on November 20th, 1870. It is worthy to note that a number of their children died at a very early or young age. It is perhaps a result of the terrible conditions and rampant diseases in the South following the Civil War. I don't think a lot of young people understand that the South was absolutely destroyed by the Civil War. There were no Army Corps of Engineers and bulldozers and Tracos and backhoes and Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart to go and buy building materials. You had to do it on your own. There were no free checks sent to people from the federal government to rebuild. You had to rebuild your livelihood and then rebuild your homes. It was a tough time. David R. Coker grew up in a war-torn South, and as a boy and young man, worked to help his father rebuild the farms and the mercantile business, J.L. Coker Company. After graduating from the University of South Carolina in 1891, David R. Coker joined his father's mercantile company and several years later became the general manager. During the years following the Civil War, Major Coker, James Lloyd, he went to college and he did some laboratory work, but he had engaged in several rudimentary crop improvement initiatives as a part of the efforts to rebuild and restore the success and profits of his 3 farms, and he did this with just limited success. His other priorities about trying to rebuild a mercantile business and just basic living took precedent. In 1898, David R. Coker fell ill while working in the mercantile store. Following his recovery, and at the suggestion of his father, Major James Lloyd, he began working earnestly on the farm in order to initiate the overall improvement efforts that were sorely needed. There are several, I believe, contributing factors that guided and motivated farm improvement efforts of David R. Coker early in the process. The first was his experience with local farmers while working with J.L. Coker Company. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were very, very few large farms with available workers. There was, however, a large amount of land for landowners who rented sections of their farms to what was then termed tenant farmers. A tenant farmer did not own the land, but would farm the land and then pay the landowner with a portion of the proceeds when his crop was sold. For the most part, tenant farmers bought seed, fertilizer, sustenance, goods, groceries, whatever, on credit from the local mercantile stores, and when the crop was sold, he or she would pay off the credit balance with what was left after sharing the profit with the landowner. In many cases, there was little or no money left over for the tenant farmer after all the bills were paid. Poverty and starvation at the turn of the 20th century were rampant, and there was a heavy migration of people from the south to the north as manufacturing jobs were still available in the northern states. Those that stayed and farmed planted their farms with cotton year after year after year because it was virtually the only cash crop at the time. Soybeans were non-existent at the turn of the century. Nobody planted. Wheat and corn were domestic use, and primarily corn as silage to feed cows. So other than cotton, and very few people planted tobacco. It was just too difficult. So cotton was it. Planting cotton year after year practiced depleted soil, and the result was diminishing yields year to year. David R. Cope personally witnessed the poverty and plight of farmers in and around Hartsville. And to make matters worse, the cotton gins at the time collected seeds from the ginning process and sold these seeds back to the farmers for planting the next year. These cotton seeds had no common or known origin and were from farms and farmers that took widely varying approaches to farm and crop management. Seed germination rates were low due to storage and moisture issues, and because of the depleted conditions of the soil, higher seed rates and higher amounts of expensive fertilizers were applied. This added extra input or planting costs and reduced profits even further on the back end or when the harvest was sold. The second contributing factor that really helped ensure the success of David R. Coker and the path that he took in his life was the fact that his uncle was Dr. William Chambers Coker, a renowned botanist at the University of North Carolina. The University of North Carolina still has the William Chambers Coker Arboretum up there that you can visit. There was also the major had hired Dr. D.N. Shoemaker to assist with farm improvements. And also because David R. Coker had befriended a Dr. Herbert J. Weber, who was recently appointed to the cotton program for the United States Department of Agriculture. It was not called the USDA back then, it was something else, but he had befriended him. We must understand that David Coker had not been trained as a plant breeder as part of his formal education. Under their guidance, David R. Coker was introduced to the plant breeding principles first conceived by Gregor Mendel in 1865. But those breeding methods were lost for 35 years because Dr. Mendel, in trying to get a teaching certificate, failed to pass biology and geology, and so his work was considered irrelevant, and his principles of breeding and improving crops was lost until 1900. In 1901 or 1902, David R. Coker was provided with 30 cotton seeds of different varieties, which he planted, grew, and crossed on the family farm here in Hartsville. Thus, in 1902, Coker Seed Company was established as the agricultural division of the J.L. Coker Company, with David Coker as general manager. With guidance, David learned to cross these varieties, and in 1906 grew a row of developed cotton which he deemed the best he had ever seen. He named the new variety Hartsville 5. David Coker continued his experiments in crossing cotton while continuing to expand the production of Hartsville 5 in isolated fields around Hartsville. In 1908, a young plant breeder to be, George James Wiles, joined the team at Coker Seed Company. In 1910, given the expanded production of Hartsville 5 cotton seeds, David Coker began giving these seeds to local farmers for free. In 1911, a graduate of both Virginia Polytechnic Institute and Cornell University with a master's in agriculture, S.B. Coker, who was first cousin to David R. Coker and the nephew of Major James Lyon Coker, joined the Coker Seed team as plant breeder in charge. The focus of breeding efforts at this time centered on cotton, rye, oats, sorghum, beans, and peas. The Coker Seed Company continued to grow and expand. In 1913, A.L.M. Wiggins, we called him Alphabet Wiggins, Secretary and business manager of Major James Lyte Coker and the J.L. Coker Company made the suggestion to David R. Coker that Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, or Coker Seed Company, could be profitable and should incorporate. However, a company name, logo, and patentable trademark were needed, and Mr. Wiggins was placed in charge of that development. Since the seed company was located in Hartsville, a red heart was chosen as the logo. The name Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company was chosen as each strain of variety had a traceable pedigree back to the original parent. Mr. Wiggins remembered his motto saying, "Blood will tell," when talking about the actions of people, and that family blood, or genetics, for good or bad, would show in descendants. Therefore, the red heart with Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, Blood Will Tell, superimposed on the heart, was selected as a symbol for the company and for registration with the United States Patent Office. The red heart trademark was first used on bags of seed and on company letterhead in August of 1914, and patent registration was granted on April 13, 1950. When presented with the patent registration, Major James Lyte Coker stated, "I see that you are using the name Coker on this trademark. I want you to see to it that every bag of seed bearing this name is worthy of it." The statement by Major Coker set the standards of expectation, excellence, honesty, and integrity for Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, its products, and its employees from that day forward, and for the company's entire existence and beyond. In 1914, at the South Carolina State Fair, Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company products won first place in the yield contest or trials for cotton, which is Hartsville 5, beans, sorghum, peas, abruzzi rye, and oats. That's up on the wall on a picture somewhere. Around 1910, George Wiles left the seed company to return to school and obtain an A.B. degree from the University of South Carolina and an A.M., which was agricultural master's from Cornell University in 1917. He then returned to work at Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company as a plant breeder specializing in oats, which was his passion for his entire life, although he did do work in cotton. In the interim years, Dr. H.J. Weber, formerly with the USDA, T.E. Goodson, F.J. Clyber, and Mr. Charles H. Ellis, Sr., who I mentioned earlier, joined the Coker team as breeders and farm managers. In the early 1920s, the cotton market in the South crashed due to the loss of the European market due to the impact of World War I. Farmers in the South were starving, and their crops were not able to be sold due to lack of demand. This resulted in additional migration from the South to northern manufacturing jobs, especially among African American men and families. It was a terrible time for Southerners, and this war-based depression was followed by the Great Depression in 1929 and 1938. It is an interesting fact of history, and for the city and community of Hartsville, that during the Great Depression of the late 1920s, a very large bank in New York City wrote the Bank of Hartsville, the little Bank of Hartsville, that should it have difficulty meeting its financial objectives to its customers and businesses, then it would loan the Bank of Hartsville money to maintain solvency. Several years later, Mr. Wiggins received notice that this same large bank in New York was insolvent and closing. Mr. Wiggins wrote them a letter indicating that the little Bank of Hartsville was willing and able to help keep them financially afloat and solvent. The New York bank framed and hung his letter in their lobby. You have to understand, the Bank of Hartsville, it had Coker College for Women, it had Sunoco, J.L. Coker Company, Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, the farmers, McNair and McKinnon mercantile business. I mean, it was in pretty good standing. And it had a Wiggins running. So, I mean, you know. But anyway, cotton buyers during this time, during this time were unwilling to pay higher prices to farmers for long staple, high quality cotton over that of short staple, low quality cotton. They were taking advantage of the farmers left and right, and this was totally unacceptable to Mr. B.R. Coker. This led Mr. Coker to establishing the Coker Cotton Company in 1912, and by 1920, Hartsville was the largest cotton buying and selling market east of the Mississippi River. There's a picture right up here in about 1920 showing all of the wagons pulled by horses of people selling their cotton to the cotton market. And it also depicts the tenant farming variety of environment with small farms. In the 1920s, if things were not already bad enough, two additional hurdles must be addressed that were devastating to the cotton farmers and seed producers in the South. By the early 1920s, the boll weevil, which had migrated from Mexico in 1892, had infested all cotton growing regions in the southern United States. Entire crops were lost. The USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, with no evidence of suggestion and with extreme cost, advised farmers to dust their crops frequently using powdered calcium arsenate. David R. Coker tested the dusting method on several fields of cotton and found that the process was hard to accomplish and that it was overly expensive to an already depressed market and pricing. David R. Coker, he also found that dusting killed all insects and led to lice infestation of cotton, resulting in leaf loss and subsequent yield loss. Mr. Coker developed his own approach, and this involved a wet mixture, 1 gallon of water, 1 gallon of molasses, and 1 pound of calcium arsenate. You may ask, and this could be either mopped on by hand, people walking down the roads of cotton with a mop, mopping it on the leaves, or it could be sprayed. But you may ask, why molasses? Well, molasses was cheap, and it came from soy, and or sugar cane, and it caused the calcium arsenate to stick to the leaves, whereas dusting would just automatically wash off. But they developed a hand sprayer, which would spray 5 nozzles. It was a hand pump, a wooden barrel with rubber bands that was pressurized. You could pump it up. And you rode on a horse in a wagon. A horse pulled it through the field with 2 people, one driving a horse and one pumping a handle to keep the sprayer going. The cost for 6 applications in the season was $1.40 an acre. The wet method was vehemently opposed by the USDA, but ultimately, Mr. Coker's method of boll weevil control became the best demonstrating practice. He fought the USDA at every turn. Eradication of boll weevil and cotton became a mission for every leader of Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, and especially for the future president, Robert R. Coker. Later methods to control boll weevil involved the use of DDT, which you're all familiar with, malathion, permethrins, and finally pheromone traps. Pheromone traps are still used today. The second big concern was for seed breeders and producers like Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company was that Coker seeds were being planted all over the South, and many generous were saving seeds for farmers planting Coker varieties. They were then bagging and selling them the next year as second year Coker seeds of the same variety. They were stealing. Mr. Coker fought and lobbied with the USDA and politicians from all southern states, and finally, in 1930, the Plant Patents Act was passed, which helped eliminate, if not fully stop, this thievery and deception. In 1950, additions were made to strengthen the Plant Patent Act, but full plant variety protection did not occur until 1970, 40 years later, with the passing in Congress of the Plant Variety Protection Act. You buy seeds today, the incentives send you a 2-inch, 3-inch stack of forms that you've got to sign because they're protected. 40 years it took for politicians and political appointees to make something happen, and you wonder why so many people dislike politicians. The addition of seed treatment with fungicides by seed producers also helped reduce the sale of second-year or non-pedigreed seed from unscrupulous collectors and sellers. By 1921, Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company. In 1927, The silver anniversary of Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company, 25 years. 57 improved Pedigreed cotton strains have been developed, as have 35 improved strains of others. In addition, 7 new and distinct varieties of cotton have been introduced, along with new varieties of wheat, sweet corn, sweet potatoes, sorghum, field corn, cowpeas, and cantaloupes. Talking about sweet corn, in 1921, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States from 1933 to 1945. He served 4 terms as president. Got struck with polio in 1921. S.P. Coker, who had been working for Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company, was struck with polio in 1921. They both went to Warm Springs, Georgia for rehabilitation and became friends and corresponded. But when Franklin Delano Roosevelt got into the presidency, my grandfather, S.P. Coker, would ship him 100 pounds of select sweet potatoes to the White House every year. So just a little side note of this. The company also still had a Brucey ride, Mary and Martha Washington asparagus, Nicole Lespedisa. Do you know you can still go into Lowe's or Home Depot garden centers today, and you can still buy, it's not Coker's, but you can still buy Martha Washington asparagus to this day. In 5-acre yield contest of cotton farmers, and where the winning farmer received $500 to $1,000 depending on the contest year, Coker cotton variety placed first in 23 of 25 years of this contest, and second in the 2 years that the Coker farmer did not win the grand prize. This was all in 1937. Perhaps the second most important contribution by Coker Seeds to the farming community of agriculture was the fact that Coker farms in and around Hartsville and at other locations in the South became the showcase venue to demonstrate best farming practices, new farm equipment, land management techniques to assist and promote the success of the Southern farmer. Farm demonstrations included boll weevil, treatment and eradication, crop rotation, row spacing for various crops, seeding and planting rates, fertilizer recommendations, and harvesting and storage. Coker Farms at Hartsville hosted and educated tens of thousands of visitors, farmers, teachers, students, and scientists to view and learn about planting for crop breeding and best demonstrated farming practices. Now I need to back up a few years to when I mentioned that George J. Wiles had returned to the seed company after completing his master's at Cornell University. In 1921, the educational bug returned to George Wiles, and he left the seed company to travel back to Cornell to complete his doctoral work or degree. On the way, he stopped by the USDA in Washington to discuss with the Grain Division possibilities for his thesis work at Cornell. There he was introduced to a new and distinct variety of red oak from Texas called Navarro. This oak variety was resistant to smut, which is a fungus that attacks oak plants and severely diminishes yield. Mr. Wiles was so excited that he abandoned his doctoral plans and returned to the seed company with a packet of Navarro seeds that he had been given. Mr. Wiles grew this variety, made plant crosses with 2 other oats, and ultimately developed what became known as full grain oats. There's a picture of it, which was both smut and crown resistance. Mr. Wiles also used Navarro to develop a new varietal type called Victor Grain, which still stands as one of the best oat varieties ever developed and distributed by the seed company. In 1938, David Coker, founder of Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company, passed away. This was a severe blow to the company and to the nation's agricultural community. To Mr. Coker's credit, he had prepared to pass the reins of the company by challenging those that worked at the seed company to the exact standards that he imposed upon himself and his work. Mr. Coker's driving motivation was for his work and efforts to benefit every farm family in this country. Excerpts from his 1915 A Successful Southern Farmer's Creed is this: I believe in farming for pleasure and profit. There is no pleasure in farming without profit. and no profit in farming without pleasure. And finally, I believe in myself and my chosen work. I can perform my daily task with a clear conscience and know that I am no man's slave. And I can drink the joys of everyday communion with the beauties and wonders of nature, with the satisfaction that I am a successful part, small but important, of the greater scheme of things. Mr. Coker, for all that he accomplished and overcame, was a philanthropist to all farmers and their families. In 1939, Dr. George Wiles, he had an honorary degree. He quit his doctoral and came back to work with us. But anyway, they gave him an honorary degree. But Dr. George James Wiles succeeded Mr. Coker as president of Coach Berry Seed Company. Dr. Wiles maintained and enhanced the standards and expectations established by Mr. Coker, and the seed company continued to grow and expand. The company maintained its excellence in honoring the Coker name, left heart, and trademark logo table. The seed company corporate headquarters in Hartsville remained the best agricultural showcases and demonstration sites in America and hosted thousands of visitors each year. In 1951, while attending the Clemson, Carolina game in Virginia, Dr. Wiles was stricken and passed away the next day in Columbus. In the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s saw a steady decline in the number of small farms in America. The cost of fuel, fertilizer, herbicides, insecticides, equipment, and yes, even seeds, made farming on a smaller scale not possible, pleasurable, or profitable. Farming, like many businesses and corporations, saw consolidation to ever larger and larger farming operations. In 1951, the son of Mr. David R. Coker, Robert Richardson Coker, was named as third president of Coach Berry Seed Company, a position that he had until the company sold in 1978. Robert R. Coker began working at the seed company in 1928 after receiving a BA degree from the University of South Carolina. Why all these people went to the University of South Carolina? I can't answer that question. Over the years, he held many different positions within the company, primarily in the area of sales. In 1944, he was appointed to the board of directors and under the leadership of Dr. George J. Wiles. While serving on the board, Robert was able to work and learn from some very astute and committed men and women, like A.L.M. Wiggins, Mrs. David R. Coker, or now Charles W. Coker Sr. from Sonoco, Edgar H. Baldwin, and Oregon. Robert Coker led a seed company with the same degree of zeal, passion, and commitment as did his father, Mr. B. R. Coker. Robert Coker pursued many avenues associated with benefiting the southern farmers across the country. In 1944, he was one of the primary individuals that were responsible for founding the South Carolina Farm Bureau. In 1953, became a member of the National Agriculture Advisory Commission. He became a trustee of Clemson College and was awarded honorary degrees along with the Clemson medallion. You go to South Carolina, but you end up getting awarded by Clemson. I don't understand. Why did so many graduates of the University of South Carolina ultimately convert to become Clemsonites? However, one passion and opportunity that always remained in the forefront of Robert Coker was the boll weevil eradication for cotton farmers. Robert Coker often stated that his life goal was to be the pallbearer at the funeral for the last boll weevil in America. Under the leadership of Robert Coker, by 1962, the 60th year of the Coach Berry Seed Company, the seed company had grown to over 40,000 acres in seed production and over 65 breeding and testing locations that stretch from South Carolina to California, north to Indiana, and then south to Mexico. Offices and seed sale sites were located in Hartsville, Tunica, Mississippi, Lubbock, Texas, Richmond, Indiana, and Mexico City, Mexico. Seed were also provided for sale in Sevilla, Spain. In the 1960s, Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company estimated that in the southern states alone, no less than 65% of cotton acres, 75% of tobacco, 40% of hybrid corn, and 8% of small grain varieties were planted with Coker seed. Seed were also sold to Syria, Turkey, Italy, Portugal, Brazil, Argentina, and other countries. It's very difficult to get your money from Brazil and Argentina. I remember. On July 19, 1964, the land on which the development of new cotton varieties, which was is 220 acres. And the work began in 1898 using Gregor Mendel's or Mendelism, plant breeding and crossing with cotton to derive new and more bountiful and disease-resistant varieties. Was designated a National Historic Landmark by the United States Department of the Interior and the National Park Service. David R. Coker and his early work represented the first scientifically based cotton breeding program in the United States. The Coker Farms National Historic Landmark here in Hartsville is only one of 7 National Historic Landmarks in America that is related to agriculture. Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company employed over 300 teammates in management and hundreds more in farm operations. In addition, the company employed hundreds of young teenage men and women after school and in the summer months to assist with farm planning, breeding, harvesting, and seed testing operations. The job involved planting the seed breeding nurseries, detasseling corn, cropping tobacco, harvesting the test rows from the nurseries, thrashing wheats, oats, sorghum, and other assorted hot and dirty jobs. The pay was far below minimum, but the rewards were great and lifelong. Many in this room today got their first paid working jobs as teenagers with Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, and I bet, without exception, when thinking back to those times, they consider that work to have been a blessing in their lives. The farm hands or field workers at Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company were really the lifeblood of the entire soil preparation, seed planting, breeding, harvesting, and testing requirements associated with any large seed company or farm. The farm hands, mostly African Americans, were treated with dignity and respect and knew how and what to do. This was a group of workers as committed to the success, mission, and goals of the seed company as were any individuals in management and leadership. Homes were provided to the farm workers at no cost. Most all lived on farm properties or very close. Many started their careers with the seed company as young boys and girls and spent their entire careers with the seed company. Many days during the summer and late fall, the ladies that worked on the farm would cook up a big pot of collard greens at that. And everyone from the president on down would gather to enjoy lunch. Lunch for many of the temporary or summer workers, like myself, Booster, Ronnie, and others, would take place with farm workers at their homes. We would usually eat sweet potato pie and drink water from a pump well. Miss Emma McCrae is one of these long-term appreciated workers, and the recipe for sweet potato pie is here. And I got it years later, if anybody would like a copy. The seed company planted large vegetable gardens for the employees and also planted fields of Garrison watermelons and cantaloupes. I'm sure that there are some here who can remember the time when these watermelons and cantaloupes were delivered to families all over Hartsville by seed company employees. Coker's Seed Company and Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, over the years of existence, worked to breed and improve varieties of rye, clover, oats, alfalfa, peas, beans, wheat, sorghum, cotton, corn, with sweetened field, tobacco, soybeans, asparagus, vetch, grapes, hogs, and Guernsey dairy cows. I don't know if they ever worked with something like kudzu. The 1970s were really a difficult and hard time for agriculture. Most of us can remember the energy or gas crisis of the early 70s, where we had to wait in line for a few gallons of gasoline. Then the cheese lines for needy and sometimes not so needy. We also had inflation rates that exceeded 20% and interest rates for cars at home skyrocketed to almost 20%. People could not afford cars or homes, and many variable loans went into default. This crisis in America hit farmers especially hard, given the amount of fuel needed to farm and the cost of equipment required to operate the farm. It hurt the seed company also, given the fact that it was a very, very large farming operation also. Coker's commitment to excellence in its products and with its farm educational initiatives over the years has served to keep profit levels from good to marginal, but certainly not exceptional from year to year, as compared to other industries less engaging or quality-minded agricultural business models. In 1977, Robert Coker and the board of directors made the decision to put the company up for sale. In 1978, the company was acquired by the German sugar beet giant Kleinfarm Lebensmittel AG, KWS for short. My father, S.P. Coker Jr., was appointed president. KWS and its management team struggled to understand and do business in the United States. In Germany, KWS was subsidized by the German government against foreign competition in currency based or non-market currency. This level of government assistance did not exist in the United States. Cook's Pedigreed Seed Company fought a constant battle to stay afloat financially. I know, I was there as a full-time employee of Quality Control and Marketing. But I'd also worked at the seed company after school since 1966. Many long-term personnel were laid off and the farm BDP educational efforts and initiatives were ceased in order to reduce costs. It was a very tough time for all. S.P. Coker Jr. retired from the seed company in 1982 and he was replaced by Joe E. Dawn as president. It was also in this period that giant pharmaceutical companies like Bayer from Germany, Sandoz Limited, Swiss, and Monsanto were using their size, finances, and technology advantages in molecular genetics to acquire seed breeding companies for the genetics associated with their breeding lines. This was the beginning of using genetic modification or GMO in order to create advanced types of human-specific medicines, and this technology allowed them to advance into the area of plant modification and production in a faster and less expensive manner than traditional plant breeding allowed, using Mendel principles and methods and making plant crosses in the field. They could accomplish in a year or 2 or 3 what it took the plant breeders at Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company 7 to 10 years to accomplish. In 1988, the seed company once again sold and was acquired for its agricultural technology or seed breeding lines by Northrop King, which was a subsidiary of the Swiss pharmaceutical giant Sandoz Limited. Sandoz Limited got 86 years worth of agricultural genetic technology and agricultural blood and sweat with the stroke of a pen to a check. Northrop King closed down the breeding and farming operations of the seed company and either sold off or internalized the various crop breeding lines for their own GMO uses. Mr. David L. Allen, long 42 years at the seed company, winner of the Order of the Palmetto, was the last seed company man standing of service to Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company. I would be extremely remiss in my account of Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company without at least naming some of the leaders, plant breeders, farm managers, and others that were valuable and contributing members of the seed company team. However, I have reluctance in doing this as I know full well that many great and worthy men and women will be left out and certainly deserve recognition. For my omissions, I sincerely apologize. I simply cannot name everyone, and I pray you understand my quandary. David R. Coker, Dr. D. N. Schumer, Dr. William C. Coker, Dr. George J. Miles, Dr. H. J. Weber, S.B. Coker Sr., Mr. T. E. Goodson, C. H. Ellis, Miss Mayweather Coker, A. L. M. Wiggins, Charles W. Coker, J. Winston Lee, Edgar H. Lawton, Doyle L. Cannon, R.S. Cathcart, B. E. Smith, H. M. Larry Moore, Dr. C. Porter Rogers, J. W. Tower, Roy Fortner from Texas, David L. Allen, Howard Harrison, Richard Geddes, Henry Webb, Josh Stanton, and Dr. Carol Miller. Dr. Carol Miller was in tobacco. And I just have to tell a small story. Carol Miller's still alive. He's up in Kingston, North Carolina. He came to Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company in late 60s, early 70s. He was one of those hippie types who came out of the 60s, the love you generation. He came in, he didn't want to wear a tie. He wore bell-bottom pants and wild shirts. He upset everybody. He was so radical. I mean, everybody was in their three-piece suits and their ties. And here comes Carol Miller with bell-bottom jeans on in the picture. He still is a trip to this day. I will note that behind these men and women was an army of extremely dedicated individuals that worked not only for themselves and their families, but also to ensure the success of the above mentioned and the success of the seed company and in the spirit of Red Heart. In addition, many will note that I have elected not to mention the many local, state, national, and international accolades, accomplishments, and contributions of the leaders of Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company that they achieved or were associated with during their time of leadership. The list is vast and impressive, but it's also available online in many of the books that have been penned about these men and women of significance and endurance. Other than myself to depict and illustrate the impact and importance of Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company and its employees, I quote from a portion of a letter received in October 1988 from the Clemson Seed Certification Department personnel. There was a gentleman that I worked with, his last name was Black. I wish I could remember his first name, Steve Krusovich. If you're on Facebook Live, send me an email with Mr. Black's full name. But I think the letter came from him. August 23rd, 1988, marked an occasion I wish had never come. On that day, seed certification personnel finished inspecting the last crop of seed produced by Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company. Thus ended, in the name of Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company, participation in the South Carolina Seed Certification Program, a good relationship that has existed for the past 41 years. Long after there are no cocoa varieties, Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company will be remembered for what the company stood for and for the caliber of its people. Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company will always be remembered as synonymous with quality, service, honesty, and integrity. We are grateful of having known and worked with Coach's people. They will always be remembered. In summary, what does all of this mean today, and why does it really make a difference to me and my life? I'm not talking about y'all or any younger. What does it mean to me? Do you want to ask a question?
Well, I was curious, what do you think is the most significant accomplishment of Coach's Pedigreed Seed Company? I know that's a big question. There's a lot of accomplishments.
I don't, I mean, you can look at some of the oat and cotton varieties and what it did. You can look at the education of farmers at the turn of the century and how to try to help them understand how to manage their farms in a more efficient manner. I don't know from a historical perspective. A cotton breeder with Monsanto years ago told me, and when you talk about what was most significant, that she said that any seed of cotton today, any seed of cotton, or every seed of cotton that's planted anywhere in the world in today's time has genetic markers that bring it straight back to the work in Hartsville, South Carolina. I also think of significance when you think about this little town. Now, we are a little town. We're a blessed town, but we're a little town. That this little town for a century, almost a century, has some of the absolute best scientific minds and plant breeders that were in existence. You know, I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, you get a guy like Stephen Krusovich, a doctor in front of his name. Why do you want to come to Hartsville when you could go to Los Angeles or somewhere? I don't know. But to me, it's just amazing. It really is amazing. And I don't know. I mean, there are so many other significant accomplishments, but I do think that the work and efforts of these people, many of whom are out a long, long gone, what deserve being remembered. But their work is still out there, and it can be traced right back here. So, does that answer your question?
You have a wonderful display of all of the pictures. And
we'll talk about some if we get time.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
But anyway, what does this all mean? The seed company is gone, most of the men and women dead. So why bother with all this stuff? I'm not asking or suggesting that people should live in the past, because if you do, you will never know or understand where you can and need to go in life. But you can learn from the past. This helps to find direction and inspiration as you move your life forward. It required an illness to get Mr. D.R. Coker out of the mercantile store and into an environment of life and work that gave him pleasure, profit, and passion. It also gave him an opportunity to assist others in need and in the best way and manner that he could while maintaining his passion in life and work. His blood told much to generations to come. So I guess the message is no hurdle or obstacle is too difficult. Every challenge can be met and overcome. Always seek the opportunity to find pleasure and profit in whatever career you choose or path you decide to follow. Try to always make sure that what you do in your life and work is beneficial not only to you, but to your family, your friends, your fellow man, and your community. Give back of your time, compassion, and money in order to help others in need or seeking help to overcome obstacles in their lives. Like the famous author Louis L'Amour said, if you find yourself on the wrong path with a tired horse, then saddle another horse and take a different path. If you remember one thing from this presentation, perhaps this will be it. From good or bad, right or wrong, when it comes to the choices and decisions you make in your life, blood will tell. That's about all I got to offer other than maybe a few stories. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Presley. That was amazing.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you. Matt, do we have any questions from our audience today?
Yeah, so first we have a couple of questions and a couple of shout outs. And if anybody has a question from the audience, just raise your hand or shout it out and we're happy to answer those as well. First of all, the burlap sacks in the back, they're always a great touch and people really enjoy looking at those. So thanks for bringing those out. You mentioned Mr. Stephen Harrison earlier. He's watching and he wants you to know that he has some of these bags hanging in his office. So
Steve, they're not for sale.
And a couple of the questions have been answered already, such as the biggest impact of Coker on Hartsville. So thanks for answering that one. But then somebody's asked, what is your favorite story about Coker Pedigreed? Just in general, what's your favorite story or memory of Coker Pedigreed seeds?
I will tell the story. It's over there, right behind Jenny Rogers on the wall. In 1955, Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company produced a variety of tobacco. It was called Coker 139. This was 1959. It was a game changer. I mean, a game changer. Most tobacco at that time, you would get 1,800 pounds of tobacco per acre. Coker 139 came along, 2,800 pounds per acre. Almost 800 to 1,000 pounds more per acre. Tobacco sold 75 cents a pound, so you're talking about an additional $750 an acre. A ton of money. Coker's Pedigreed Seed Company, when it developed Coker 139, it could not produce enough of that tobacco seed. It sold out. 55, 56, and 57. Just could not. Everybody had brought it from South Carolina north to Virginia, all the way out to Texas. Everybody wanted 139. Late in 1957, the United States Department of Agriculture came to Hartsville, South Carolina. They raised their hand and says, Coker Pedigreed Seed Company, y'all got to stop selling Coker 139. Coker Pedigreed Seed said, excuse me, are you out of your mind? No. He said, you got to quit selling it for two reasons. The first, the Marlboro Man is unhappy. Anybody remember the Marlboro Man? The Marlboro Man's unhappy. Coker 139 is a bland tobacco. So much is being planted that people like Marlboro, R.J. Reynolds, big tobacco companies could not make their blends to get their flavor in their cigarettes or cigars. But the second biggest factor is Coker 139 doesn't have enough nicotine. It does not meet the minimum nicotine content standards to keep kids hooked when they start smoking. There is a small team in Washington, believe it or not, to this day, that looks at the nicotine content of tobacco. They could breed tobacco with less nicotine so that people smoking wouldn't get hooked as well. But no. That little group wants to make sure that tobacco lobbyists keep sending them money. So if anybody in that little tobacco team in Washington's looking, we know what y'all are doing.
Any questions from the audience? You want to shout it out?
Tommy Goodson.
I've always heard that the breeders at Pedigreed Seed were responsible for developing the Roundup Ready seed. I didn't know if there was any truth to that. And later it was sold to Monsanto.
I am personally not aware up until 1978 that the seed company had developed any Roundup Ready varieties of cotton or soybeans. I think that Steve Harrison or Dr. Krustovich would know better than I, and Stephen can certainly send, Steve Harrison can certainly send a response. He was there with me, and his dad was a grain breeder, and I think cotton was the first crop that was Roundup Ready with perhaps soybeans being the next crop. But I had never heard that the seed company was the first to develop Roundup Ready and sold it to Monsanto. Monsanto wasn't even in the picture when the seed company first sold in 1978 to KWS, and then subsequently to Northrop King. So, and Monsanto does not own Northrop King. Now, some of the seed breeding lines were sold off to other companies buying Sandoz and Northrop King in 1988. Whether or not they went to Monsanto, I don't know. But to answer your question, I would say no, that is fiction, not fact. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Jim Tyler,
Yeah.
may I ask you what you think was the most significant accomplishment of Coach Pedigreed Seed Company? How long were you employed there?
I think it was about 15 years.
Okay.
But that 139 you were talking about, when it cured out, and it was on the floor, you could walk in the warehouse and spot it. And I could tell you a story about that, but I'm not going to put it on there. Spot it. And it cured very easy. And what you said about the nicotine and all, but the seed breeders, not just the culture, but they really brought a lot to the agriculture. We got some farmers around that experimented on their own, and they done a good job, the ones that I know. And but I would like to say one thing about the man that hired me, that was David Allen. A fine man. He really was. And he could get after you about something in a roundabout way, and about 30 minutes later, he just told me something. But one of his favorite sayings, though, when he hired me, he said, you don't have to bust a button to get what I tell you to do done, but I want it done. I don't want to have to tell you again. If you make a mistake, own up to it. But do not cover it up. I will not tolerate a cover up, because in this seed breeding, if you make a mistake and cover it up, it could follow this company for 10 years. And he was a good man now. He was a good Christian man. And I'm sorry he didn't shake his in at the nursing home, but I love that man.
Thank you, Jim.
I really do. We have any time left?
Well, Principal, you're all a wealth of knowledge, and we can sit here talking all day. But we've been talking an hour already, if you can believe that. So before we lose visitors and people have things to go on, I do have a couple of things I wanted to let people know.
I've got one more thing too.
Absolutely. Well, in essence, Presley, if people wanted to learn more about Coker Pedigreed seeds or to come in to view what's on display here, I guess first, how long will you have the display up? And then second, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, the best way probably to contact me is to either email or call the Hartsville Museum, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I could give out, the Coke Farms National Landmark, we do not have a website. We do have a P.O. box that you can write, 1563 in Hartsville 29551. But we don't have a website or email address or Facebook page. Or we rely on you can always call the city of Hartsville and the tourism people in Hartsville, and they will get a message to me. They have my number. Andrew's got my number. You got my number.
Yes, I did.
Jim Tyler's got my number. Tommy Goodman's got my number.
You're easy to find.
Booster Wynn got my number, but I'm easy to find.
You are. We appreciate that.
And I will say, any of the pictures up here, because the Farms National Landmark is a 501c3, we count on donations and contributions to stay afloat. If anybody listening would like to become a friend of the farm, then please email your name, address, telephone number, email address to Andrea Hart. They'll get it to me and we will put you on the list. If you came in Crema and you saw one of these pictures on the wall, kind of almost like the most iconic catalog was the 1963 catalog. Absolutely gorgeous picture. A lot of people take this magazine and they frame it. I put it on the tables here in Crema. If anybody would like a copy to take home, or a Red Heart, or a Story of the War, or Miss Emma McCrae's sweet potato pie recipe, they have. But anybody that would like a picture if they saw it on the wall. Every picture's got a number. You write that number down, you leave a piece of paper with your name and your email address and the picture number, and say for a contribution to the Coke Farms National Landmark, which you can write off on your taxes according to Tommy Goodson, you count it. Leave a check for $25, I will email you a digital copy of the picture.
Perfect.
Stop.
And we'll have all the information on our website to contact Presley, as well as this recording today. So if you tuned in late, if you need to go back and we'll listen to it again, all this will be on our website, www.hartsvillemuseum.org. While you're there, we also have a donate button, not trying to compete with Presley or anything, but we do rely on donations to help series like these and other lectures. Speaking of, I want to give a quick plug to our next lecture, November 5th. We'll have Stephen Mott from the Florence County Museum. He's a curator there, and he'll be speaking on Edward Gay, who was a famous landscape artist, and he has ties to a major coker here in Hartsville. So be sure to tune into that November 5th, 11 o'clock. Thanks again to Tiffany and Crema for having us. It smells delicious in here. It always does. So Presley, you have something else you want to know? Are we good? Nope, Presley's good. Andrea's good. I think we're all happy. So thanks again so much for tuning in. Anything else, Andrea?
No, but if anybody has a picture of Dr. Miller in those bell-bottom jeans, the museum would love to have it.
One right down there.
There you go. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thank you.